Hello and welcome to Keeping It Young podcast, conversations about marriage, family, and ministry life. I'm Dave.
And I'm Bethlie.
And we are the Youngs.
Thank you for joining us.
We are so glad you joined us today, and we are in the middle of this series called Rethinking Christian Weddings.
Yes.
And I hope you're enjoying the series so far. And just one more time, we want to, or I guess again, not one more time, but again, remind you it's Christmas season. And one of the ways you can be a part of the Keeping It Young podcast family is to visit mypillow.com.
Yes.
And use the promo code YOUNG. And they have great savings available. Use that promo code. So I hope you'll take advantage of it.
Yes.
And so one of the easy ways to do that is just to log into mypillow.com/YOUNG. And that'll be a great help to us, and we know their product will be a blessing to you as well.
And
so check that out.
And to those on your gift list.
Yes, it will be. But I know you're right in the middle of planning for Christmas and all the events that go into that. And what an exciting time of the year. And we're going to hopefully finish up this series on rethinking weddings the next 2 weeks.
Yes.
And we'll have a special Christmas episode and a special New Year's episode, and it'll be 2024. So when you think of it like that,
my word. Oh,
goodness.
my word.
Time is just flying along.
So amazing. So amazing.
Yes, it is. Well, are you ready to get started here?
I am.
All right. So here's where we've been. We are talking about Christian weddings, and we looked over some stats and just laid out a whole ton of stuff about engagements, about the weddings. And then we talked about our heartbeat in sharing this particular series is that we wanted just to challenge believers to have a genuinely and undeniably Christian wedding. And so we've talked about a lot of stuff. We laid out what is a Christian wedding according to the Bible.
Right.
And if you were part of that, you know the word ceremony. We talked about the word covenant, the word consummation. We even talked about the government and how important it is that we do honor the government as believers. And then we talked about how that marriage is sacred. We're to recognize that. The key word that seems to be important to us right now is this word covenant.
Yes.
And we can't overlook the fact that a wedding is not just a special Disney type event. When you live happily ever after. No, it is a definite covenant, and that's the Christian viewpoint of a wedding. Last week we talked about the parts to a wedding, the processional and the sermon and the charge and all of that. And then we talked a little bit about the fact that we have to recognize, this is where we ended, we have to recognize that a Christian family and a church family are all a vital part in the fulfillment of that vow. And it's one of the reasons that traditionally weddings have been done in a church with a church family. And just to, help you think that through a little bit, I don't know that, there's not a have to. There's not a command in the Bible that thou shalt get married in the church with thy church family.
Right.
But one of the things that Beth and I are aware of is that marriages are under heavy attack. And it seems like in our culture, we are separating ourselves increasingly from the church and from the church family and even from our own family.
Oh, right.
I'm amazed at how many weddings today couples will not only not want their church family to be a part of it, they are, not invited. They can send gifts, but not invited to part of the ceremony. Sometimes even not their family to be part of the ceremony.
Right. It's just very exclusive.
Yes. And Bethlie and I believe that because a Christian wedding, a Christian is a Christian family, a Christian involves a church family. Our belief on that is that as much as possible, we think you should have a wedding in the church. And, if finances are an issue, like, well, we can't handle that many people at a reception, well, then say that. Just say, we're just going to have a ceremony. We would love for you to join us. The reception will be private.
Right.
But the ceremony is the important part, not the reception. And we
seem to have that backwards these days. Yes,
we want to focus on the reception and not the ceremony. But the ceremony, there's all kinds of reasons to have it in a church, and we'll talk more about this later. One is that it does bring a solemnity to the occasion. And there's also reasons to have it in the church, because having the wedding in the church, especially if that's your church, then the people who love you and who, especially, if you've grown up in that church, the people who love you, the people who know you will be there to celebrate with you on that day.
Right.
And then think about attending worship services when you're reminded this is where we got married. And these are the people that, we were part of our marriage. And so there's just all kinds of reasons about that. So
there are. And then you're in front of a host of witnesses who are happy for you, first of all. And then if it's your church family, there will be people there that will invest in you, whether that be with just getting together with you to see how you're doing. We'll be checking on you. We'll be encouraging you and cheering you on. I think it's a wonderful thing.
Yes. And so that's just, that's kind of an aside there, not a command. So we're not, giving you a biblical command, but we do believe it's some really good and wise advice.
Yes.
And I hope you'll at least consider it. Mm-hmm. So let's jump in today. And basically, we're going to take 2 more sessions here, 2 more episodes here to talk with you about just challenging you to rethink weddings.
Yes.
And so let's start with this one. The first thing we'll talk about today is plan them wisely, and then we will challenge you next week to make them sacred affairs.
Yes.
So two things we want to do here. And the first one is just to challenge you to plan a wedding wisely. And to that end, let's get started. The best Christian premarital counseling possible.
Yes.
That's a mouthful, isn't it?
It is. But remembering that your wedding is not just about the wedding itself. It's not just about, hey, let's have this huge celebration where we get to buy the fancy dress and have all the flowers and the food at the reception and things like that. It is about that covenant vow that you are going to be making to each other in the sight of your witnesses, in the sight of God. And so it is all about the marriage. It's not about the wedding. And so premarital counseling, we believe, is just vitally important.
Yeah, and I would just even say to you, if you're getting married, recognize that you need it.
Yes.
Marriages are not easy.
No.
And we have a whole lifetime to grow into a marriage, but the more, preparation you can have in advance, the better prepared you are to make the marriage get off to a right start and a powerful beginning.
Right. And it could be that you've grown up in a household where the roles and responsibilities that are the example that you have of your mom and dad, maybe it's wonderful. Maybe you just have this wonderful Christian home and you think to yourself, well, what do we need to know? We just have these great examples, but you are coming together as a new family. So
Yes.
your coming together should be based on, okay, what do we need to know so that we can pursue God in our relationship? And also it could be that you're thinking to yourself, goodness, I have no good example whatsoever as far as Christian marriage. Well, this could be doubly helpful to you. And also maybe put your heart at ease that it's not, there isn't like a doomsday going into it. Like, can we even do this? Absolutely, you can if you follow Bible truth.
So we would suggest that you start with your pastor.
Mm-hmm.
And if by chance your pastor is not, I don't do that, then get his recommendations on who you could go to for premarital counseling.
Right. Or ask other young couples in your church, who did you go to?
Yeah, and so we strongly believe you should find a place. Start with your pastor.
Yes.
Start with someone. We also would suggest as part of your premarital counseling, read good books together.
Yes.
As you're building towards it. And we recommend Alistair Begg's book called Lasting Love, Gary Thomas's book called Sacred Marriage.
Right.
We even, love the book called The 5 Love Languages.
By Dr.
That is
Chapman.
one. Yep, everybody
excellent.
should read that one.
Yes.
Intended for Pleasure as you get closer to the wedding event itself, the honeymoon event.
Right.
And that's a great book by Dr. Ed Wheat, Intended for Pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think you should read it too soon, especially if you are coming into a marriage with a purity of heart and purity of life.
Right.
And but as you're, coming within, a couple of days to a couple of weeks, perhaps, of your honeymoon,
Mm-hmm.
it is an excellent book. It was a great help to Bethlie and me.
It's a great resource.
As we started our marriage. So start with a pastor, read well, read well, get really good books. And one other thing, we've seen a couple of couples that just decided in the 6 months prior to their marriage that they would find couples whom they respected and take them to a coffee or to a meal and just say, we're getting married in 6 months. What advice would you have? And sometimes it's, good to write down questions. Ask every couple, how did you handle conflicts?
Right.
What was the greatest challenge in your marriage and how did you overcome it? Or what has made your marriage fun?
Right.
So write down questions and seek out counsel, seek out advice. In the multitude of counselors, there is safety, God's word says.
Yes.
So we would say get the best Christian premarital counseling possible. Secondly, we challenge you, if you're thinking through a Christian wedding, discuss everything about your marriage in advance.
Yes.
Everything. And just when something crosses your mind, write it down, and your next get together, date, walk, coffee,
Right.
talk about it.
Communicate.
And we wrote down, I think I got down 13 different, just off the top of my head here in front of me. How do you see your roles biblically? What do you see yourself bringing to the marriage? What about finances? What about children? Do you want them? How many would you think you want? And all of that's important.
And if you think that you don't want children, you should be listening to past episodes of the Keeping It Young.
Yes, because Bethlie and I believe that God doesn't give every couple children.
No, he does
but
not.
But we also believe that it would be wrong not to want them.
Yes.
We believe that. So how will you solve disagreements? That's a very, very, and you start that discussion by how did your parents do it?
Right.
What do you absolutely not want to do?
Right.
And so some people will think this is how you solve a disagreement, but someone else may think, your fiance may think that's absolutely wrong. It's very good to know that in advance.
Yes.
Where will you live? What will be your budget? Who will pay the bills? Who will cook the meals? Who will clean the house? Who will mow the yard? Who will care for the car? How will you handle debt?
Yes, those are all good questions to ask one another.
Just ask. Talk up a storm about all the issues you can think of that go into a marriage.
Yes.
And maybe even as part of if you're one of these couples that's willing to go to couples who you admire and respect and, get advice from them and just, have a meal or a coffee together. And just to say to them, what advice, write some of these questions down and ask them.
Right.
How do you do it? And why did you do it that way? And so all of those are just wonderful, wonderful things. We would also add to this idea of planning wisely, set a budget for the wedding and do it together.
Yes.
This is so huge. Finances are just huge.
They are. And also, typically, just traditionally, the bride's family does the bulk of the wedding as far as paying for things, as far as ordering things, setting everything up. But you know what, girls? Your groom should have some input too. Talk about things with him. And I've heard some girls say, well, you have no say in this. Well, why not? He's marrying you. So
that is a red flag.
That is a red flag.
A red flag if the idea is you have no say in our wedding.
Yes. So talk about things together and do set a budget, not based on the cultural stats that we read in our first episode on this series. Those are crazy. $35,000 for a wedding. That is crazy. Save your money, do something else with your money. And probably most of you starting out don't have $35,000 to blow on a wedding. And most of your parents don't have $35,000 to blow on a wedding. So set a good budget. Practically speaking, you do have to plan for, okay, if we're going to have 150 people, that's a lot of people to feed. Are we going to feed them a meal? Are we going to just feed them dessert? All of those things come into play. And then, set a budget for how much you're going to pay for your dress, how much is going to be spent on the suits or tuxedos for the men, and all of that. Just talk about it, and then stick to it as best you can.
Yeah, and things are just always expensive. That's a normal part of life. But a wedding is not a time necessarily to showcase our money.
Right.
It is certainly not, and you young, fiancés, listen to this very carefully. It's not a time to be Disney-esque. Hollywood and Disney has made us think of weddings as these elaborate, beautiful, and dramatic affairs.
Right.
Well, they don't have to be. If you can afford to spend $1 million on a wedding, well, that's between you and God. But there's no reason to do that, to have a covenant relationship. You can have a very beautiful, use candles, some flowers. You could be very minimal and still have a very sweet, very sacred, very loving, very memorable, and very beautiful wedding.
Yes.
And so just set a budget. Be very wise about it. This is, don't think of Christian wedding as, well, we got to go on this destination. And one of the sad things we've noticed is that for some couples, they spend so much time focusing on the wedding event, which will last an hour. We're going to spend $25,000 on an event that will last an hour.
Or a day, yes.
Or at most half a day, or, probably at most 4 hours. So you're going to spend a ton of money on this when could you do things for half that and take the other half and make a down payment on something or pay off a debt? Use your money more wisely. We are required by God. We are commanded by God to be good stewards of the resources God gave us. So planning your wedding wisely. And so we're talking to you young couples, but moms and dads, let's mention this to you as well. Moms, this is not a time for you to take over and make everybody miserable.
Right. This is not the time for you to have the wedding that you wished you had had.
So many times we go to weddings and everybody is like, oh my goodness, stay away from the mother of the bride, or the father, the mother of the the groom.
Of the groom, yes.
Oh my word, this is a shame on us. Mm-hmm. This is a Christian wedding about the covenant. It's not about you getting your way. It's not about you snapping your fingers. It's not about you making your point.
Right.
This should be a time when it's a Christian wedding. We should be full of love and joy and peace.
Yes.
Simplify it so that you can have joy and peace on the day. And make sure that when it's all said and done, everybody ends it loving each other, respecting each other, for each other.
Right.
And so, if we've got to go into such great lengths that everybody's uptight and bothered, something is wrong.
Yes.
And so we're just simply saying to you, get the best Christian premarital counseling possible, discuss everything you can think of in advance, budget for your wedding, and then one we've already mentioned here, but worth parking on. Bethlie and I recommend that you use the church facility.
Right.
And there's just some real practical reasons for that. One is it's usually the best choice economically. If this is your church, this is where and should not every Christian have a church where they serve God,
yes,
where they love the people, where they are loved by the people, where they have a pastor.
Right.
Everyone should.
Yes.
And every church, does things differently. Some, charge to use the auditorium, and there's reasons for that. It costs money.
Yes, it does.
To, have the lights on. It costs money to turn the air conditioner on. It costs money for someone to clean things up, to make sure things are prepared for the next event, which is usually a service on Sunday.
Right.
And so, honor all of those things, but you'll almost always find out that a church is the best choice economically.
Well, and they also usually have a team of ladies or a couple of ladies in the church who have done this before. And so you will meet with them and they can tell you where all the decor is that other girls have used and just left with the church. And they might have some decor that you can use and you will like, and they might let you use it free. And then you've got someone else who is helping you coordinate things, and someone else who is helping you get maybe some ladies to help you serve in the reception and people to help clean up afterwards. These are all things. It's helpful to have someone, and churches usually have someone that is in charge of that can meet with you and help set up all of that stuff.
Yeah, and so take advantage of that. It will, the church is the best choice economically, and don't be afraid of using your church. Some people are like, yeah, well, I'm not getting married in our church because it doesn't have a middle aisle, or it doesn't have the right lighting, or the pews, I don't like the pews. Well, I get all of that, but there's just something powerful about your church. And as God's people, we are living in a generation that undervalues the church.
Right.
We often will choose sporting events over church. Church is, kind of a loose priority. And yet, so we think, Christian wedding is so important. The church is so vital in our lives that we should consider very carefully, if at all possible, using the church facility. It does provide a constant reminder of the wedding.
True.
And if that's your church, every time you go into the building, that's the aisle you walked down. These are the people that were there when you got married.
Right.
And this is just, it's a wonderful thing. And many times using the church is the easiest way for your closest family and friends to join you.
True.
Now, it is true that, like in our church, and you from our church that are listening to us are, we're aware of the fact that people will come to our town from all over the place.
That's true.
There's military people that come to our town. We have people in our church from New Hampshire, and we're in Florida.
Right.
We have people in our church from California. We're in Florida.
Right.
So it is true that in our culture, we have to deal with that. So there are obvious, no hard and fast way to do this. But at the same time, just doing the best you can, typically using a local church does make it easier for family and friends. Right.
If you have, everyone has to travel in anyway. There's a place, you already know the town, hotels that people could book. You also know places where people might be able to stay, maybe church members who would be willing to put someone up in a guest room. There's all of that. If you have a destination wedding, people are going to end up paying more probably to come to your wedding.
Sure. And so Bethlie and I are just talking about planning wisely. This is one of the ways to rethink Christian weddings. Maybe wisely sounds like a bad word because there's a ton of planning that goes into a wedding. Maybe the better word even would be to plan differently.
Right.
The world plans and plans and plans. Let's go to this destination. Let's spend this X amount of money. Let's buy these tickets. There's so many weird things that can happen in our culture. So plan very wisely, but even differently. And we would even add this to this idea as well. Focus more on the covenant than on the presentation.
Right.
And that sounds kind of weird to say even, doesn't it?
It does. And really, when you're thinking of all the immediate things that the bride and her family, maybe the bride and her mom and her bridesmaids are all going to be doing, especially as the day really is coming into focus. I remember with Abigail's wedding, we ordered flowers wholesale from Sam's Club, and they were delivered to the house, and they were beautiful. I would recommend that if you are into doing your own flowers. They came all set and ready to prep, and so all we had to do was put them in big 5-gallon buckets. So anyway, we got all of these flowers in, and there was so much. When I first looked at them, I thought, my goodness, this is going to take forever for us to get all the bouquets put together, all of the displays for the front of the church put together. And honestly, with all the help that we had set up ahead of time with the bridesmaids and family in, it did not take just a few hours. And we were home and having a cup of tea or coffee before we had to get ready for the rehearsal dinner. So it really is wonderful if you can take that focus off and just remember, instead of, oh my goodness, we have so much to do, take the focus off of that, get help that you need, call people and say, hey, can you help me do? And people will, as much as they can, will help. And then put the focus on, you know what, this is about these two getting married. So if all the bouquets don't come together perfectly, or all of the flower displays or whatever, it's okay, because this is about the vows that they're going to take and the marriage that they are going to begin at this wedding day.
One of the things that I observed in both our daughter Abby's wedding and then our daughter-in-law's,
yes,
by keeping things simple, it also kept things peaceful.
Absolutely.
And by keeping things simple, it also kept things relational.
Yes.
So that our being together with Dave and his family, and your mom came, and you know, my family came, all of that relational time of not being uptight.
No.
Things got done simply. They were clear. They were well thought out. They were very simple.
Yes.
But it did make the wedding something very peaceful and beautiful. And everybody remembers it as, well, remember we were sitting around talking.
Yes.
And my brother, who I don't see super often, but my brother was here for my daughter's wedding, and he has brought up several times about, well, we really enjoyed just sitting and chatting. Well, who has time for that if everybody's so stressed because there's so much to do?
Absolutely.
So we're just saying you focus more on the covenant than on the presentation. Weddings don't have to be expensive. They don't have to be elaborate, but they ought to be genuine, sincere, and sacred. And as part of that, focusing on the covenant, we would just challenge you to choose vows that honor God and represent your Christian faith.
Yes.
And so to that, the traditional vows are traditional and all, but they are also written to represent our Christian faith.
Right, to represent the roles and responsibilities as laid out in the Word of God.
That's exactly right. So we would suggest to you that as you're thinking about and planning for weddings, that you get the best Christian premarital counseling possible. You discuss everything about your marriage in advance. You get a budget, and you use the church facility, and you focus more on the covenant than on the presentation.
Right. Just keep it simple, girls. I know you want it to be beautiful, and it will be. All of our daughter and our daughter-in-laws, who we have been to their weddings, obviously, they did not have elaborate affairs, but all of them were just gorgeous. Absolutely gorgeous. The girls looked gorgeous. The groomsmen looked very handsome. The receptions were wonderful. Both our daughter Abigail and our daughter-in-law Bethany chose just to have a dessert reception, and it was really good. And you just let people know ahead of time so they know that they're not going to chow down. And then our daughter-in-law Kareth, she had a family in her church that wanted to do the reception, and they made some of the best Mexican food I have ever put in my mouth.
That is so true. That is so true.
It was very, very good. So, just to be simple does not mean that it's going to take away from the beauty of it at all.
Yeah. So one final thing here to add before we close out today, as you're planning wisely, go ahead and plan wisely about the honeymoon. And we're not talking about the bed, we're talking about the event of the honeymoon.
Right.
So many times as a young couple, the pressure of our society is, where are we going to go that's cool? Let's fly out early the next morning, and let's fly to, wherever cool destination.
Right.
And oh my goodness, we're going to see this and we're going to see that. The purpose of the honeymoon is so you and your spouse can begin the life of oneness.
Yes.
It's a time for you to slow down, to get to know one another. It's a time to be intimate. It's a time to focus on each other, not on sightseeing. There's nothing wrong with adding all of that.
Right. And you can certainly do some sightseeing on your honeymoon, but I think it is best to just think, okay, we're going to spend time together. And you both probably come from a busy life already and are probably headed into a busy life in your marriage. And so what's wrong with taking that week away just to relax, to get to know one another as a new husband and wife?
And Beth and I would suggest that slow down, choose a place where the first night or two of your honeymoon is without hectic, frantic travel and moving and running and frustrations. It's unwise to finish a wedding in the evening and fly out at 4 a.m. the next morning.
Yes.
Because the first night you're together is a whirlwind of stress. That's not wise.
Right.
And it's not best. Slow down, plan your honeymoon in such a way that you can slip into the honeymoon easily.
Yes.
And choose a place where there's decent food. You're going to eat out. So you focus on the things you do together.
Yes.
And you don't want to choose a honeymoon that distracts from the fact that the purpose you are here for is not just to have a cool vacation with a cool guy or a cool girl. No, this is the beginning of your covenant relationship.
Yes.
So plan the honeymoon very wisely, very carefully. That probably deserves an entire episode down the road, and maybe we'll do that.
Yes.
But we're out of time today, so we are so glad you're joining us here in this month of December as we are talking about Christian weddings. This is the month where a lot of Christian weddings do happen, and a lot of people get engaged in this month.
Yes.
So this is a good month to talk about this. We have one more week to share with you some things, and join us next week. We're going to talk about making, or just as you're thinking through a Christian wedding, we want to talk about making them distinctly sacred.
Yes.
Any further thoughts before we close out?
I think we can hit it next week.
Okay, have a great week, and don't forget this week to serve the Lord with gladness.
The Keeping It Young podcast is a Bax 5 Media production.